Yo, did you hear about all the changes at Sony? They got new CEOs, their live service strategy's changing, and they're rethinking their PlayStation Network policies. Now, is it a coincidence that all of this is happening at the same time? Well, as a detective, I don't believe in coincidences. But I'm not a detective. So as a regular guy, I do believe in coincidences, but this is not one of them. Something is going on, and I'm gonna get to the bottom of it. Sony has reshuffled their leadership. The CFO, Hiroki Totoki, sick name, cool rhyme, has just been appointed the CEO of Sony. But when it comes to video games, a more important change was made. Hideaki Nishino was just appointed to be the future CEO of the Sony Interactive Entertainment Group, the group that's in charge of PlayStation. What's interesting though, is that Nishino was already the CEO. Nishino and Herman Hulst were both co-CEOs at PlayStation. Nishino handling the hardware and the tech, and Hulst handling PlayStation Studio. Now Hulst is still in charge of PlayStation Studio, but Nishino is now the sole CEO. Honestly, it seems less like a promotion for Nishino, it seems more like a demotion for Hulst. But I mean, you know, semantics. All these changes will go into effect on April 1st, which is a very specific and important date. A date that could break this mystery wide open. April 1st is my birthday. Maybe they could be preparing some kind of elaborate gift for me. That's just speculation, but only time will tell. But what does this change actually mean for PlayStation? I'm not in back rooms at Sony, so I don't know for sure, but it seems almost like superficial and symbolic. Because the people managing the hardware and the people managing the PlayStation Studio are just going to be the same people. Now this could be a show to investors that some changes are coming to Sony after some public flops that happened in 2024, you know, like Concord or an underwhelming PS5 Pro or like the whole Helldivers debacle. We'll get into that in a bit. So that's possible. Maybe they're making these changes to show that Sony is taking those flops seriously and is working to do better. But is there anything actually changing? My guess is that Sony is going to be shifting their focus more about hardware. The only change in structure that happened, that PlayStation Studio and hardware kind of went on the same playing field, but now they've lifted hardware above. And so it seems like that might be where their new focus is. I mean, we obviously are thinking about the PlayStation 6, but also there's all but confirmed rumors of a PlayStation handheld, which, you know, PSP and PS Vita people will be super happy to hear about if and when it's announced. But a shift towards the future hardware of PlayStation also means a back away from past hardware of PlayStation. People have been complaining that PlayStation hasn't leaned in enough to the PS5. Almost every game is launching on the PS4 as well, so that makes the PS5 kind of feel like optional. But that's changing. Sony is making moves to make the PS5 feel less optional. They just announced that starting in 2026, PS4 games will start disappearing from PlayStation Plus. If the game's not on PlayStation 5, then it won't be on the service. And it only took 6 years for them to make a push towards people getting the PS5. You know, just in time for the PS6, so they can do it all over again. If you're still on the PS4 and you're using PlayStation Plus, this probably doesn't come off as good news. But for me, it feels like the first step forward for Sony to try to prioritize PlayStation 5 development. Which, you know, I have no dog in this fight. I have a PlayStation 4, but like, I don't play it. I don't have a PlayStation 5. So if you do play on the PlayStation 4, or if you play on the PlayStation 5, if you have a PlayStation Plus subscription, let me know if this affects you, if you're happy about it, or if you don't care about it at all. But yeah, this does feel like the first move that PlayStation is pushing people towards the PlayStation 5, whether they like it or not. But even with this happening, there's one reality that Sony can't deny. And that's the fact that more and more people are starting to get off of consoles entirely and play on PC. And Sony has had some issues with this in the past. We all remember when Helldivers 2 was released, right? Super successful, super popular, everyone loved it, with one small, giant, noticeable blemish soon after release. Sony started requiring all players to have a PlayStation Network account. Sony thought, it's free. Tons of people will sign up. It won't even be a big deal. It was, in fact, a big deal. Content creators everywhere were trashing it, and it was getting bombed in the reviews. If you think this is an overreaction, keep in mind that PlayStation Network is not available in every country, and this was not a requirement at release. So some people purchased the game and then were no longer able to play the game anymore because they couldn't create a PlayStation Network account. With such a huge, loud, and harsh reaction from the player base, Sony had to backtrack. They had to walk back the policy, which was a huge win for gamers. I remember being very proud during that time. But this win didn't reach beyond Helldivers 2. Sony still had tons of games that required a PlayStation Network account to be played on PC. But another big announcement is that is also changing. Sony just announced that several games that used to require PSN will no longer require. And this came out just ahead of Spider-Man 2 being released on PC. But it also affects games like God of War Ragnarok, Horizon Zero Dawn, the remaster, and Last of Us games. Instead of requiring a PlayStation Network account, they'll just be rewarding you for having it with things like skins, cosmetics, maybe some exclusive armor or loot. But for me, this feels like a big step forward. And that's not to say that there will be no games that require a PSN account, because some multiplayer games will probably always require one. It does feel like maybe for the first time ever, Sony is like listening to what the audience is saying and saying like, you know what? We're not gonna fight you on anymore. We're gonna start adapting. And another way they're adapting is with live service games. And I know that some people, when they hear the words live service together,
It sends them into a spiraling rage.
but with Concord being such a visible failure, Sony had to rethink how they were going to handle live service games, and if they were still going to do them at all. What's the result of this? Well, Sony announced that they've canceled 2 live service game projects that were already in progress. The first being a God of War live service game, which like, what? I'm a fan of God of War, but I don't even know what that looks like. Live service God of War. And they also canceled a new IP that they had in the works. This doesn't mean that they're not gonna do any live service games ever again, which honestly is good, because I mean, live service it gets a bad rap because a lot of them are bad, but there's some really good live service games. I mean, Helldivers 2, for example, was the 3rd highest selling game of last year. This just means that Sony's gonna be way more cautious with their live service games, and maybe, hopefully, they're gonna stop just forcing studios that don't make live service games into making live service games. Hopefully that's just a thing of the past. It was just a hiccup in the industry, and we're all gonna forget about it. And Sony can go back to doing what it does best: making single player games. Am I right? Or am I right? So here's where PlayStation's heading. They're gonna be focused more on hardware. They're gonna keep putting more and more focus on getting people into their ecosystem of PSN and playing on the PlayStation 5. But now they're going to, hopefully, do it slightly more tactfully and actually be careful about the policies they implement to get there. Instead of using walled gardens, they'll use incentives. Instead of creating more big budget live service games, they're pulling back and starting to reanalyze what the market actually wants. It's a major shift for PlayStation's future, and one that I'm generally happy about. Hopefully this is representative of the industry as a whole. Hopefully live service games start getting more scrutiny before they're just made, and gamer experience starts coming before funneling people into your ecosystem. Another thing I want to bring up is that PlayStation is also acknowledging that more and more gamers are switching to PC. Too many to be ignored. So they're starting to lift exclusivity after a short period of time. I'm sure everyone's noticed this with games like Final Fantasy and the Spider-Man series and The Last of Us, hopefully with Bloodborne, which is good because while consoles used to be dominant, PC gaming is definitely dominant now. And if you're interested in how that switch up happened, you can check out this video here where I break it down. My name is Terrence. I'm going to keep talking about games till I find the perfect one. Peace, love,